Hello Art 2. So the purpose of this video is simply to take the stencils that I just showed you all how to make. Remember, we've got our reflection, which is our mirrored one. We've got our slide or translation, which is the one that we will just move across and repeat. And we've got our rotation stencil, which again will have sort of a pivot to it. So the first one that I'm going to show you is the slide. Now you've already seen a little bit of this, but I'm actually going to, this time, actually almost start the way I normally do, but I'm going to actually start in the middle of the page, which might be the way that some of you prefer to start. And I'm just going to trace my stencil very carefully as usual. Making sure that I turn my fingers and turn my hands so that I can be holding the very edge of whatever I need. And then because this is a slide, all I have to do is move it over, move it down, move it up. And essentially it's just going to repeat itself in the same direction over and over again. So you would just keep repeating over and over in the same direction until you fill that whole page. So remember, as we have talked about, it will eventually be like putting together a puzzle to where the different parts and pieces can only go in a certain direction in a certain place, regardless of where you feel like they should go. So it does get easier and easier the more you do. So then I would keep going until that whole page is filled. But in the interest of time on this particular video, I'm going to flip my page and just show you how to do the rotation one. And this one I'm going to start sort of in the middle of the page, but to one side. And I'm going to start just by tracing it carefully, as I usually do. So then my image is just going to pivot. Now I am not one of those people who can just automatically know where and how it's going to pivot. So for me, I tend to, on my first one, figure out exactly where it's going to go. So I see that this can only fit here. So for me, that tells me that it pivots on this point, because it's just going to pivot across until it's in that next slot. And then I would go ahead and make sure it's lined up and trace. Because remember, the rotation one, you pivot to create the stencil, and then you also pivot to trace that stencil. So here we know it's going to pivot again around that same point and line up right here. And then it's going to pivot one more time right here. And we're going to see sort of the curve down here. We're going to also see where it goes here on the edge and then comes up to meet here. So then remember, the rest of it is not necessarily a pivot on a point. It's like putting together a puzzle. but the pattern will repeat. There will be more areas where it will pivot. So I'll show you that in just a second. Because right here, since I know that this is my pivot point, I know that it's going to come across again right here. Because it's just going to pivot along that point. And come right here, and you can see that it locks in. And then I'm just going to trace it again. So you absolutely can use the pivot point more or less, depending on which way you do it. I tend to, like I was showing you, tend to just treat it as a puzzle and just put the parts and pieces where they fit. That's just what works best for me because I personally am not very mathematically inclined. So for me, putting it together visually makes a little bit more sense than thinking about it mathematically. Each person is completely different though, and there is no right or wrong in terms of how to put it together. So once again, I'm just going to carefully trace, and I would fill up my whole page with that pattern, so I would just keep going. But once again, I'm going to show you now the other stencil that we made together, our reflection stencil. And remember, this is the one that I find to be the most challenging, simply because you do have to actually flip the stencil, and there is a little bit more of a right or a wrong in terms of how to create things with the reflection. So I've got it all traced once, and I know I'm going to be flipping it. For me, I always tend to flip it the wrong way, but I'm going to flip it here, and then it goes in here. So you can see where it locks, and then I would go ahead and trace it. So then I'm going to be flipping it again back to the same direction that it was at the beginning, and it's going to lock in down here. And I'm just going to put a little bit there along the edge of my paper. And then I know that it's going to be flipping this way again. Like I said, it's a struggle point for me. So then I'm going to flip it again and get this little bit in here. So then this side, I'm going to actually just scoot it over and draw because it's on the opposite side. So it's here, it's flipped, it's facing this way again. So for me, the reflection makes more and more sense the more of them I have on the paper, simply because I can see the pattern taking place more. So like, for instance, here, I know it's like this, so I know up here somewhere it's going to be somewhat flipped. But like I said, I'm going to just stick with my sort of puzzle idea and stick it in here because those edges all line up, and then I'm going to trace. And then right here, it's going to flip this way again, flipping back. So like I was saying, this goes here, and then it flips up. So then I'm just going to keep flipping around and keep filling up the space on this page with this stencil. And then I will go back and show you just finishing out the pages with the other stencils, because I do seem to have enough time within my little recording to do that. So again, just keep flipping. Keep on going. So you can tell that I'm getting faster as I go with this one, simply because there's less options. So for me, that makes it a lot easier. Because once I get the pattern sort of developed, I get into the swing of it, and it becomes easier. So then that would be my reflection one, completely finished. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm just going to finish my rotation one. Just to show you that you really don't have to necessarily do it all at once. If you have to start on it and then stop, especially once you get several of them on there. Because like I keep saying, it is a lot like putting together a puzzle. To where once you have the stencil made and you know that it does interlock accurately, you can work on it in little bits at a time if that's the only chances you get. So do not feel like you have to just knock it all out. You do have deadlines, and you do probably want to knock it all out. But if you do have something going on that does take you away from it for a little bit, that's totally fine. You will not lose your spot or anything. So then that one's done. So that is my rotation example completely drawn out. And then my slide was just on the other side. So I'm just going to flip my page. And then I'm going to turn it the correct direction. And then just continue sliding this last stencil. Remember, the slide one just goes the same direction the entire time. It literally just slides across the paper. That's why I kind of tend to prefer the word slide translation instead of translation. I like the slide idea better because it's literally what I'm doing with the paper, is just sliding it over and over again. So like I said, more often than not, you'll just hear me call it a slide, just because it's easier. You do still want to trace carefully. You do still want to make sure that you are getting all of your pieces lined up, especially along the edges of your paper, because you don't want to leave any details out. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to jostle the camera there. And then that one, all I have to draw on there is one little line right here. So then that would be my slide. Wait, skip a spot down here in the corner. And then all three of these, once I finish this last little bit, all three of my tessellations are now ready to outline with an ultrafine tip or other type of Sharpie. Once again, we've got our slide, just goes up and down. We've got our rotation, which is going to pivot. So you can literally see it pivoting along the point here, just kind of in a cycle. And then we do also have our reflection, which is going to go back and forth.